Welcome back, everyone, to Stories That Shouldn't Be Told. In today's episode, I'm sharing a true terrifying story from deep beneath the city, a night shift in the subway tunnels, and the footsteps that followed when no one else was there. Every story is a warning. Some places are better left undisturbed. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and share it with anyone who loves a good scare. And tell me in the comments, what are your favorite types of horror stories? Your support keeps the darkness talking. Now, let's begin. My cousin worked as a subway maintenance technician for the City Transit Authority for over 6 years. His shift ran from midnight to 8 in the morning, which meant he spent most of his time alone in the tunnels when the trains weren't running. He told me this story that still haunts me, and after hearing it, I completely understand why he transferred to day shifts. It happened on a Thursday night in October when he was doing routine track inspections in one of the older tunnel sections downtown. The tunnel he was working in had been part of the original subway system built in the early 1900s, and it had this creepy atmosphere even during normal conditions. The walls were covered in decades of grime, and the lighting was sparse, with long stretches of darkness between the old fluorescent fixtures. He was about 2 miles into the tunnel when he heard what sounded like footsteps echoing from somewhere behind him. This was strange, because the tunnels were supposed to be completely empty during maintenance hours, and all his co-workers were assigned to different sections of the system. He stopped and listened carefully, but the sound had stopped too. He shrugged it off and continued his inspection, thinking maybe it was just the sound of water dripping or pipes settling. About 10 minutes later, he heard the footsteps again, but this time they were definitely closer. The sound was unmistakable. Someone wearing heavy boots walking on the metal tracks. He turned around and shined his flashlight back down the tunnel, but saw nothing except the empty tracks stretching into darkness. He called out, asking if anyone was there, but his voice just echoed back at him with no response. My cousin decided to radio his supervisor to check if there were any other workers in his section, but his radio was getting nothing but static. This wasn't entirely unusual in the deeper tunnels, but it made him feel more isolated. He picked up his pace and continued working, but kept glancing over his shoulder. Every few minutes, he would hear those footsteps again, always seeming to stay the same distance behind him. The really disturbing part came when he reached a section where the tunnel curved sharply to the left. As he rounded the corner, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There were fresh footprints in the dust and debris on the tracks, and they weren't his. The prints were from heavy work boots, but they were much larger than his size, 9 feet. What made it even more unsettling was that the prints seemed to be following his exact path, stepping in some of the same spots he had walked. He started walking faster, but the footsteps behind him seemed to match his pace. When he slowed down, they slowed down. When he sped up, they sped up. It was like someone was deliberately staying just out of sight, maintaining the same distance. His heart was pounding as he realized he was essentially trapped in the tunnel with only one way out, and someone or something was between him and the exit. My cousin came to a maintenance alcove built into the tunnel wall and decided to duck inside and wait. He turned off his flashlight and pressed himself against the wall, hoping whoever was following him would pass by. He waited in complete darkness for what felt like an eternity, listening to his own breathing and heartbeat. Then he heard the footsteps approaching the alcove, getting closer and closer until they stopped right outside where he was hiding. The footsteps stopped, but he could hear heavy breathing just a few feet away from him. He held his breath and tried not to move a muscle. After several terrifying minutes, he heard the footsteps resume and slowly fade as they continued down the tunnel. He waited another 10 minutes before turning his flashlight back on and carefully emerging from the alcove. When he shined his light on the ground where the breathing had come from, he saw more of those large boot prints in the dust, along with what looked like drag marks, as if someone had been pulling something heavy along the tracks. The sight made him abandon his inspection entirely. He ran the remaining distance to the exit, constantly looking back and expecting to see someone following him. The next day, he reported the incident to his supervisor and requested that they review any security footage from the tunnel entrances. The footage showed my cousin entering the tunnel alone, but strangely, it also showed him exiting with what appeared to be a second shadow moving behind him, though no second person was visible on camera. His supervisor couldn't explain it and suggested it might have been a technical glitch with the cameras. My cousin never found out who or what was in that tunnel with him, but he refuses to work alone in the underground sections anymore. He says there are parts of the subway system that feel wrong, especially the older tunnels, and he's convinced that something lives down there in the darkness. He transferred to surface maintenance work the following month and has never looked back. That was Below the City. If you made it this far, you know the darkness doesn't always stay underground. Like, share, subscribe for more real horror stories, and remember, some shadows don't need a body.